Rendering materials is a great way to give life to your sketches. In this video, I'll be rendering 3 different forms to look like plastic, wood, and like a shiny metal, chrome metal over here on the cylinder. So first I'll start with, I actually did a underlay kind of sketch with just a C1 Copic marker, and now I'll just add some line weight to it with the Papermate Flare. So we got our cube in place, and I'm going to render this one to be just like a plastic. And what I'll do is make the floor that it's on be actually shiny, a bit more reflective, so to see how a relatively kind of matte or semi kind of gloss plastic would reflect in a highly shiny surface that it sits on. So I'll start with like a C5 over here, or C3 on this side, and of course starting with just a little bit lighter of a marker is good, and kind of blending it down from the top is nice. And I'm making this one look quite matte by you know, not letting it dry up and become very streaky, so it's not like the object itself is not going to be so reflective. It's just the surface that it'll stay on that'll be reflective. So the same thing goes with the dark side of it. So we got a nice matte kind of object, and maybe I'll toss, let's see one if I can find it here on top, just so that it can have some sort of tone on the top as well. And again, I am like using, you can see that I'm kind of starting from the top down when I was doing these vertical surfaces, and then also from the back forward when I was rendering these out. So now we have a nice distinction between the C1, C3, and C5. And what's happening, what I can do is kind of bump up some of the line weight on this. And so this is a pretty matte kind of cube, but the surface that it's on is nice and shiny. So what's happening is it's as if it's kind of, maybe not on a mirror, but maybe like a glossy kind of glass, or glossy kind of plastic kind of surface. And so what's sort of happening here is that we are experiencing a reflection. So if this is the kind of plane that it's reflecting in, what we're essentially seeing is a exact kind of reflection of the lines that we have on the actual cube on the surface of the reflective material. And so what we need to do is just kind of drop in, I guess I'll do it on this side first. Drop in some color. It'll be lighter than the shade itself that's on the object. So I'm doing like a C3 over there, and this will be like a C1. And maybe I'll kind of bump it up a little bit more. But I'm varying the stroke there, and I'm making it so that it is a little bit streakier. fine. Maybe we can even kind of drop in a little bit of that C5 as well and blend it out. Just to get the dark side of that dark. And so, yeah, this is if that object was reflecting into the surface down below. And so that, you know, and so it's really just the surface that we're interested in and how it'll reflect. And that's nice to, if you're kind of seeing it on glass or a nice reflective kind of surface. And it's really just kind of mirroring the geometry that's at the top. So that's kind of doing a, this is like a matte plastic, and then there's a reflection here. Next what I'll do is render this large plank in wood. And so what I'm using here are some Charpak markers. These are warm grays, but they come off very, like, not gray, very brown. So you have to kind of test them out, see how they work for you. But what I'll do here is, again, oh, actually, I guess I should start with defining the lines. Okay, so we've got our surface. Here we'll go with the light marker and define the outlines of it. You can see it's very brown, it's very not gray. When you're rendering wood, what you're really doing is emulating kind of some of the wood grain that you would find in the surface or the material itself. So I was just going with a very kind of sometimes it's nice if it's a little bit streaky actually, but just kind of a wavy kind of guy. And I'll do the same on all sides actually. And this will be the shadow side, so I know I can kind of bump up some of the marker there. Okay, great. So we've got that. This is like a C2, and here it'll be like a C6. But what you want to do is essentially draw some of the pattern that you would see in the wood. So I like to kind of put in some of these knots. And just try to follow, you know, you're really just kind of defining some of the wood grain here. And so we see the wood grain on the top going in this direction, but this is obviously not going to be, we're not going to be doing wood grain in these directions, because this is we're cutting from a section of a trunk, of a tree trunk, right? So what we're going to get in here is actually something a little closer to the rings of the tree. And here we'll also get some of the wood grain because it's going in that direction. And sometimes it's nice to have these kind of connect, like there and there, just to kind of show how the surface changes. So there you got, you know, the C or the worm 2. I'll come back with it again and kind of darken up some of the edges here. The wood is kind of imperfect in that way. You'll have some darker spots and some lighter ones. So I want to kind of preserve some of the light that I have. You know, make it a little bit more interesting. And then I'll go again with the C2 on this dark side quite heavily. And so this is just using 2 markers. If you have a couple of them at work, as long as they're kind of within the same family, that works nicely. And you know, I left that edge there a lot lighter on the top, so that this is a very stark difference. So you're really using your, you know, markers to your advantage, and trying to vary the difference between surface change quite prominently. But that's pretty good so far. I will toss on heavier line weight. That's good. And kind of drop in a shadow as well. And that could really be, I can use the kind of darkness of that. Warm gray here on that. So there you go. That's sitting nicely. So this is the wood grain. You can see the rings on the side that it was cut open. There you go. So that's like how you would kind of texturize some of your the wood paneling, and I think this really, you know, works well if you get the scale right. Sometimes if it looks a bit weird, it's probably because you drew it a bit, you know, the grain a little bit too large. So maybe go with a thinner marker, or it doesn't really fit the scale of your object. So kind of be aware of that. Here is going to be a nice cylinder. And I'm using this underlay as well as a guide more than anything, suggestion. But I'm redrawing everything, right? That's the important part there. So with cylinders, so with chrome specifically, like it actually helps if you have a nice light blue, because you're kind of picking up with chrome, you're basically rendering the thing around it, the things around it, and in this case, you know, adding some blue to the top of it will kind of indicate that there's this kind of blue sky. That's what you would see in it. It also is just like a natural kind of color that you can find in the metal itself. So it just like lends itself well to becoming very reflective. You'll see the contrast between how these two are kind of rendered when I'm finished here. So, and since it is like highly reflective, it's like very streaky and very prominent when it comes to the actual shapes that you see in the cylinder, because we have to kind of keep in mind the roundness of it, so everything follows a certain kind of surface rotation. So here, what we're going to do is like we're going to have something a little bit, you know, definitely more striking, more contrast than what we have here. So sometimes actually, but we can kind of build it up. So let's go with like, just like a C, because I kind of want to have, you know, there's it not be like extremely white on certain edges. So I'm going to just kind of knock it back with some C1. That's fine. And like the core kind of shadowy part here will be almost reflecting the shadow that it casts rather than anything else. But we're gonna kind of do an abbreviated version where we're not gonna be too fussy about it. So just adding some C1. I think what I'll do is kind of upgrade it to probably as like a C. Let's go with like a C5, I think. And what we'll do here is kind of define some areas. And then kind of jump in with C7, I would say. And really, you don't want to have the darkest part kind of be in the center of it. You kind of want to have this high contrast wherever you can. So I'm actually going to even add in like another C7 stroke there. So we're kind of capturing this white space in there. Kind of same thing happening there, and then also dropping it on the top as well. So we're kind of reflecting things around it. And I think what I'll do is just kind of, because it is pretty dark down there, add some more just to show that it's the kind of shadowier side. But we don't really get a lot of shading on the object itself when it's so highly reflective. But you're really reflecting the shadow that I'll toss in down there, so that's really good. Here, if you have some even stronger, like I think I have a C, I thought I did. I don't know where it went. But you can even add in like your Sharpie. For like a really high contrast. Nice high contrast. And so I was mentioning the kind of blue. I have like you can use like a pastel even sometimes works. But I have this nice light blue that I will kind of, and it's actually nice because it's kind of dry, that it's gonna be kind of streaky. But that's fine. And we'll also kind of add it to the underside there, just because it's also reflecting some of the light, and I think I'll just kind of darken this a little bit with so it kind of depends what you're sketching, what shape it is. What the environment is, especially with shiny object. Like this is a shiny thing, so the surface, so it's reflecting the matte object. Here we have, like a really shiny kind of chromed cylinder, so we have some reflections kind of going in a couple directions. So we see kind of the blue being picked up in different directions. You can see that it's like very shiny here. And what we can do is drop in the shadow. And that start with a C7 and maybe even bump it up a bit more. Go. And so this is the kind of sky that's reflecting. And then we have these like really high contrast in there. And then, I mean, if you even have like white, you know, I've left white here, but like you would get a lot of these highlights here. You know, on the kind of surface changes where there's this kind of corner, this roundness to it. So that's where you'll get some really high kind of contrast white. So yeah, different kind of ways of rendering forms, rendering materials. What we're seeing sort of in here is the reflection of the shadow in the object, and it's kind of curving around. Then we kind of have, you know, in a way, the horizon line and the sky, you know, reflecting in all of it. So that's how it kind of, you know, makes sense. Here I think I might have gone a little bit too dark on it. Sorry, here I could have gone a little bit too dark on it, but the, you know, the fact that I'm using the same markers on the same form in a similar kind of way just like makes it still feel natural. But I'd probably try this again in another kind of way, or maybe start with lighter markers, lighter till you get it right. So there's the matte with the kind of reflecting in the surface. There's a wooden kind of texture just with a couple markers, pretty simple stuff. And then chrome, which gets a little bit more psychedelic, but is also super fun to render. So there's how to render some materials with markers.